Imagine for a moment that you could literally create your own coincidences. That you could develop a technique so powerful it would make money appear in your life every day, through opportunities that arise as if the universe itself were conspiring in your favor. Sounds crazy? That's exactly what Marcus thought. At 45, this unemployed car salesman had spent over 2 decades believing that coincidences were just, well, coincidences. Chance. Blind luck. He mocked anyone who talked about signs from the universe or synchronicities. But then something extraordinary happened. Marcus discovered a secret technique based on real scientific principles that not only changed his financial life forever, but proved that we can literally program the universe to work in our favor. In just 6 months, this skeptical and broke man became a millionaire, not through dubious schemes or lucky breaks, but by developing a synchronicity protocol that made money opportunities appear in his life daily. Hi, I'm Charlie, host of this story that will revolutionize your understanding of how financial abundance really works. If you're tired of struggling through life, feel like you never have luck, or simply want to discover how some people manage to attract money like a magnet, prepare for a journey that will challenge everything you believe about coincidences, destiny, and prosperity. Today you'll discover the secret technique that can transform any ordinary person into a conscious creator of millionaire coincidences. And you can apply this technique yourself today. For this, I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Consider this your first positive synchronicity of the day. If you don't like it at the end, just dislike it. Let's begin this story that could change your life forever. Marcus Rodriguez was sitting at the kitchen table of his one-bedroom apartment, looking at the termination letter he had received 3 days earlier. At 45, he had been let go from Automax dealership for the 5th time in his career. Always for the same reason: inappropriate attitude with customers and colleagues. Inappropriate attitude, he muttered to himself, crumpling the letter. They want me to pretend I believe in nonsense to sell cars. Marcus had always been known for his direct personality. Some would say even rude. He had no patience for customers who talked about feeling the car's energy, or salespeople who said things like, "The universe will conspire for you to get financing." For him, sales was pure mathematics. Price, payment terms, profit, period. This rigid mentality had defined not only his career, but his entire life. Marcus grew up in a family where the most common phrase was, "Life is hard, and then you die." His father, a factory worker who worked 40 years at the same job, always said, "Coincidence is for..." It was an environment where any conversation about intuition, signs from the universe or energy, was immediately ridiculed as crazy talk. Marcus had internalized these beliefs so deeply that he became a bitter and skeptical person. At 45, he had never married. Family is too expensive, he justified. He had never traveled anywhere. Tourism is a waste of money. He drove a 15-year-old car and lived in the same rented apartment for a decade. The most frustrating thing was that Marcus was intelligent. He understood cars, knew how to negotiate, had experience. But his negative energy and resistance to anything that wasn't logical kept him trapped in a vicious cycle of temporary jobs and financial difficulties. That Tuesday morning, while drinking his black and cheap coffee, Marcus reflected on the last 20 years of his life. Job after job, always the same story. Started well, but his abrasive personality and refusal to play the game of modern sales ended up costing him his position. "These salespeople nowadays," he grumbled, "keep talking about customer connection, positive energy, attracting abundance. Pure nonsense. Sales is about product, price, and need. The rest is hot air." Marcus picked up the newspaper. Yes, he still bought physical newspapers. Considered internet young people stuff and began looking for job ads. The classified section was getting smaller and smaller. Most companies had migrated to online platforms he was reluctant to use. His cell phone rang. It was his brother Robert, 2 years younger, who worked as a mechanic. "Hey, Marcus, did you find anything?" "Not yet. But I will. I always do. Man, you're already 45. Don't you think it's time to change strategy? Maybe be a little more flexible? Marcus felt the familiar irritation rising. Flexible how? You want me to become one of those smiling salespeople who talk nonsense about universe energy? No, Marcus. But maybe you could be less, how can I put it, less yourself? After hanging up, Marcus thought about the conversation. Less himself? He was who he was. Direct, honest, no frills. If the world couldn't handle that, the problem was the world's, not his. But a small voice in his head, a voice he always quickly silenced, whispered, "What if the problem really is yours?" Marcus shook his head, pushing the thought away. He had built his entire identity around being the realistic guy, the one who doesn't fall for nonsense, questioning that would be questioning who he fundamentally was. That afternoon, he decided to do something he hated. Go to the dealership to try to talk to the manager about possible rehiring. Not because he believed it would work, but because he needed the money. Automax was on a busy avenue, a modern glass building that always made Marcus feel uncomfortable. Everything there seemed designed to impress, from the marble floor to the ornamental plants that, according to him, were waste of money that could go to salespeople's commission. When he arrived, he saw his former colleagues working. Most greeted him politely, but Marcus noticed the discomfort. He knew his reputation preceded him, the competent salesman, but impossible to work with. "Marcus!" a familiar voice called him. It was Daniel, a salesman who had started at the company 6 months before Marcus was fired. "How are you?" "Surviving," Marcus replied, his standard response to any question about how he was. Daniel smiled. There was something different about him, Marcus noticed. An energy, a confidence that wasn't there before. And then Marcus noticed something that deeply bothered him. Daniel was wearing an expensive watch, Italian shoes, and driving a new BMW that was parked in front of the dealership. "Is that car yours?" asked Marcus, trying to hide his envy. "Yes, bought it last month." "Sales are going very well." Marcus frowned. Daniel was an average salesman when he still worked there. He wasn't bad, but definitely wasn't exceptional. How had he achieved so much success in such a short time? "What do you mean sales are going well?" "You weren't exactly salesman of the month when I was here." Daniel laughed, but not maliciously. "True, I changed my approach. I started paying attention to, well, let's say I started working with the flow instead of against it." "What flow?" "What are you talking about?" "Marcus, you've always been very skeptical about these things, so I don't know if you'll understand. But I started noticing patterns, coincidences, and instead of ignoring them, I started following them." Marcus felt that familiar irritation. "Oh no, you also became one of those positive energy salespeople?" "It's not about positive energy, Marcus. It's about synchronicity, about being open to the opportunities the universe presents." "The universe doesn't present anything, Daniel. Opportunity is hard work and persistence." Daniel looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed compassion and amusement. "You know, Marcus, I thought exactly like you. I thought everything was coincidence, chance, blind luck. But then I started documenting these coincidences and discovered there were patterns. And when I started following these patterns consciously," he gestured to the BMW, "well, the results speak for themselves." Marcus was about to respond with his usual skepticism when something made him stop. Daniel didn't seem to be trying to impress him or sell something. There was a sincerity in his voice, a quiet confidence that Marcus had never seen in him before. "What kind of patterns?" asked Marcus, surprised by his own curiosity. "For example, every time I followed an intuition about which customer to approach first, or when I changed my route to work because I felt something good happened. A customer who wasn't planning to buy ended up closing a deal, or I met someone who referred me to another customer." Marcus shook his head. "That's confirmation bias, Daniel. You're seeing patterns where they don't exist." "Maybe," said Daniel, smiling. "But my bank account disagrees with you." At that moment, the dealership manager appeared and waved to Daniel. "Daniel, your 3 o'clock customer arrived." "The Porsche guy." Daniel turned to Marcus. "I have to go." "But think about what I said, Marcus." Sometimes being too skeptical can close us off to possibilities we never imagined existed. Marcus stood in the parking lot, watching Daniel head toward a well-dressed customer who was looking at a Porsche Cayenne. There was something deeply disturbing about that conversation. Not because Daniel was talking nonsense. Marcus still believed it was nonsense, but because the results were undeniable. How had an average salesman become so successful in such a short time? And why was Marcus, with all his experience and knowledge, still struggling to keep a basic job? For the first time in decades, Marcus allowed himself to question whether just maybe he was missing something important. Maybe his mental rigidity, which he had always considered a strength, was actually limiting his possibilities. But then he shook his head, pushing those thoughts away. "Coincidence," he muttered to himself. Daniel got lucky, that's all. Marcus entered the dealership to talk to the manager, but his mind kept returning to the conversation with Daniel. And an uncomfortable question echoed in his head. What if it wasn't just luck? Was Marcus finally ready to question the beliefs that had defined his entire life? Or would his resistance to change continue keeping him trapped in the same cycle of financial failures? 3 weeks had passed since the conversation with Daniel, and Marcus couldn't get it out of his head. He had gotten a temporary job at another dealership, Car World, but thoughts about synchronicity and patterns continued bothering him like a speck in his eye. "Nonsense," he repeated to himself every time he caught himself thinking about the subject. Daniel got lucky, period, but curiosity, a feeling Marcus had suppressed for so long he had almost forgotten how it felt, was beginning to grow inside him. During his lunch breaks, he found himself discreetly researching synchronicity on his phone, always looking around to make sure no one was watching. That's how he discovered Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who had coined the term. Marcus read with growing skepticism about meaningful coincidences and causal connections. To him, it continued being talk from people who didn't understand statistics and probability. "If you flip a coin 1,000 times," he muttered while reading, "eventually it will come up heads 10 times in a row. Doesn't mean the coin is magical." But then something happened that made Marcus question his own certainties. It was a rainy Thursday, and Marcus was having one of the worst sales days of his career. 3 potential customers had left without buying anything, and he was beginning to feel that familiar pressure that always preceded a dismissal. During lunch, he decided to walk to a nearby snack bar instead of eating the sandwich he had brought from home. There was no logical reason for this. In fact, it was a waste of money he didn't have. But something was pushing him to leave the dealership. At the snack bar, while waiting for his order, Marcus heard a conversation at the next table. 2 businessmen were discussing the purchase of a car fleet for a delivery company that was expanding. "The problem is that the dealership we were negotiating with doesn't have the models we need in stock," one of them was saying. "And the deadline is tight." Marcus normally wouldn't intrude on other people's conversations. He considered it invasive and unprofessional. But something made him turn and say, "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. Are you looking for a car fleet?" The 2 men looked at him with some suspicion. Marcus realized his approach had been too abrupt, as always. "Sorry for the intrusion," he said, trying to soften his tone. "I work at Car World. They're on the avenue. Maybe we can help." What followed was the strangest negotiation of Marcus's life. Normally, he was straight to the point, focused only on technical and financial aspects. But that afternoon, something different happened. He heard himself asking questions about the company's challenges, about the owner's dreams, about how the right cars could impact business growth. It wasn't the usual Marcus. It was as if another person was speaking through him. 2 hours later, Marcus had closed the biggest sale of his career, 15 cars, with a commission that would pay his bills for the next 3 months. Walking back to the dealership, Marcus was in shock. What had just happened? Why had he decided to go out for lunch? Why had he intruded on the conversation? And why had he completely changed his sales approach? Coincidence, he said to himself, but the words sounded hollow even in his own ears. That night Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed replaying the day's events. There was something disturbing about the sequence of coincidences that had led to that sale. The impulsive decision to go out for lunch, being in the right place at the right time, the inexplicable change in his approach. The next day, Marcus did something he had never done in his life. He called Daniel. "Daniel, it's Marcus." "Do you have time to talk?" "Marcus." "Sure, man. How are you?" "Confused," admitted Marcus, surprising himself with his honesty. "Remember that conversation we had about synchronicity?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I remember. Why?" Marcus told about the previous day's events, trying to maintain a skeptical tone, but unable to hide his perplexity. "Interesting," said Daniel when Marcus finished. "And how did you feel during the sale?" "Different. Like I wasn't myself. Like something was guiding me." "Marcus, can I ask you a question? Have you ever stopped to think that maybe your resistance to these nonsense things is actually limiting your possibilities?" Marcus felt his usual defense rising. "It's not resistance, Daniel. It's healthy skepticism. I don't believe in things without scientific evidence. But you just gave me evidence, Marcus. A sequence of events that led to the best result of your career. I'm not saying it's magic. I'm saying maybe there's something that science doesn't completely understand yet." After hanging up, Marcus kept thinking about the conversation. Daniel had touched on something that deeply bothered him, the possibility that his worldview was incomplete. That afternoon, he decided to do an experiment. If synchronicity was real, if there really were patterns he could follow, then it should be possible to test it scientifically. Marcus took an old notebook and wrote on the first page, "Synchronicity Experiment, Day 1. He decided that for a week he would document any strange coincidence and see if he could identify patterns. If nothing comes of it, he said to himself, at least I'll prove it's all nonsense and can go back to living in peace. But deep down, Marcus knew something had changed in him. The previous day's sale had planted a seed of doubt in his deepest certainties. And for the first time in decades, he was genuinely curious about something he couldn't explain rationally. On the first day of the experiment, Marcus decided to pay attention to his impulses. When he felt like approaching a specific customer, instead of following the order of arrival, he followed the impulse. When he had the intuition to mention a specific car model, he mentioned it. The results were strange. Not spectacular like the previous day, but definitely out of the ordinary. 3 small sales, all resulting from impulses he would normally have ignored. Coincidence, he muttered, but it was beginning to sound like an empty mantra. On the second day, something even stranger happened. Marcus was serving a customer who seemed interested in a basic sedan. Normally, he would focus on closing this sale quickly, but something made him ask about her family, about her future plans. He discovered she was pregnant with her second child and that her husband was considering changing jobs. Instead of pushing the sedan, Marcus heard himself suggesting she wait a few weeks, that maybe it would be better to reevaluate the family's needs. The customer was surprised by his honesty. "You're the first salesman who suggested I not buy a car today," she said, laughing. 2 weeks later, she returned with her husband, who had gotten a promotion, and they bought a luxury SUV. The commission was 3 times larger than it would have been with the sedan. Marcus was beginning to notice a disturbing pattern. Every time he acted against his usual aggressive salesman instincts, every time he followed impulses that didn't make logical sense, the results were better. It was as if the universe was rewarding him for trusting something beyond pure logic. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The universe didn't have consciousness, didn't make decisions, didn't reward behaviors. It was just a set of physical laws operating mechanically and predictably, or wasn't it? Marcus was discovering that questioning his most fundamental beliefs was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. If he was wrong about synchronicity, what else could he be wrong about? And if his limiting beliefs about money, success, and deserving were also just beliefs? For the first time in his adult life, Marcus was genuinely open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was more mystery in the world than his rational mind could comprehend. But would he have the courage to follow this discovery wherever it led him? Or would the fear of questioning his fundamental identity make him retreat to the safety of his old certainties? Marcus was on the 10th day of his synchronicity experiment when something happened that would change his life forever. Until then, the results had been intriguing, but still explainable by logic. Better sales, more receptive customers, some interesting coincidences. Nothing that couldn't be attributed to natural improvement of his skills or pure statistical luck. But that Monday morning, the universe decided to show its cards in a way that not even the skeptical Marcus could ignore. He had woken up with a strange feeling, a restlessness he couldn't explain. During breakfast, he found himself looking out the window repeatedly, as if expecting to see something specific. It was completely unusual behavior for him, who always followed a rigid morning routine: coffee, newspaper, shower, work. What the hell is happening to me? He muttered, trying to concentrate on the newspaper. But the words seemed to dance on the page, and his mind kept wandering. On the way to work, Marcus normally took the same route every day: Main Street to Central Avenue, then straight to the dealership. It was exactly 12 minutes by car, and he had timed this route hundreds of times. But that morning, when he reached the Main Street intersection, something made him turn left instead of going straight. There was no logical reason for this. Traffic was normal, there were no construction or accidents. Simply something pulled him in that direction. "What the fuck am I doing?" he said out loud, already preparing to make a U-turn. But then he saw something that made him stop the car on the shoulder. A sign: "Land for sale, ideal for dealership." Marcus stared at the sign for several minutes. The land was perfect. Prime location, adequate size, excellent visibility. It was exactly the kind of place where he had always dreamed of having his own dealership. A dream he had buried years ago for considering it unrealistic. He wrote down the phone number, but didn't call immediately. Throughout the workday, the image of the land kept hammering in his head. It was as if something was whispering, "Call, just call." "This is ridiculous," he said to himself during lunch. "I don't have money to buy land. I can barely pay rent." But the restlessness only grew. At 3 in the afternoon, Marcus couldn't stand it anymore and called the number on the sign. "Hello, I'm calling about the land for sale on Pine Street." "Oh, great. I'm Robert Silva, the broker in charge. Are you interested in seeing the land?" "Well, I don't know if I have the financial means at the moment. Look, can I be frank with you? This land has been on the market for 8 months. The owner is desperate to sell. He can be very flexible with the terms." Marcus felt something strange happen in his chest, a mixture of excitement and terror. "What kind of flexibility?" "Why don't you come here this afternoon? I can show you the land and we can talk about the possibilities." At 5 in the afternoon, Marcus was standing on the land with Robert, a middle-aged man with a genuine smile and positive energy that would normally irritate Marcus deeply. But that day, for some reason, he felt comfortable. "The owner is a 78-year-old gentleman," Robert explained. "He bought this land 20 years ago with the intention of opening a business, but never managed to. Now he wants to get rid of it to help pay for his wife's medical treatment." Marcus looked around. The land was even better than he had imagined. Perfect location, easy access, natural parking. It would be ideal for a small and specialized dealership. "How much is he asking?" Robert hesitated. "Well, the market value would be around 300,000. Buddhist he's flexible. Hemenchenupaltak 180,000. With a down payment of only $30,000 and the rest paid in installments over 3 years. Marcus felt the world spin. 30,000 down payment? He didn't even have 3,000 in his account. But something inside him, a voice he had never heard before, whispered, "Ask about other options." And if someone didn't have the $30,000 for down payment now but could pay in another way? Robert looked at him with curiosity. What kind of other way? Well, I've worked with car sales for over 20 years. I have experience, contacts, market knowledge. What if I could offer services in exchange for part of the down payment? Marcus couldn't believe he was saying that. It was completely out of character for him to make such creative proposals. Robert smiled. Interesting, Mr. Anthony has always been a businessman. He has some old cars he wants to sell. Maybe you two could talk. 2 hours later, Marcus was sitting in Anthony Miller's living room. An elegant gentleman who received him with coffee and homemade cookies. His wife, Martha, was undergoing chemotherapy, and the medical bills were consuming their savings. I have 3 classic American cars in the garage, Anthony explained. A pristine 1967 Ford Mustang, a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro, and a 1970 Dodge Charger. I bought them all as investments, but never managed to sell them for a fair price. Marcus examined the cars and almost fell over. They were in exceptional condition, true relics. The 67 Mustang was pristine, with original V8 engine and factory-correct paint. The 69 Camaro SS had matching numbers and complete documentation. The 70 Charger RT was absolutely impeccable, with preserved original interior. Mr. Anthony, in today's muscle car market, these cars are worth a fortune. The Mustang can easily reach $45,000. The Camaro system 55,000 range, and this Charger RT can reach 65,000. We rattle king about 165,000 total. Anthony's eyes widened. That much? Yes, sir. I can sell these cars for their real market value, and you can deduct my commission as down payment on the land. Anthony looked at his wife, who nodded with a weak but hopeful smile. Son, if you can sell these cars for a fair price, we have a deal. Marcus left Anthony's house in total shock. In a single day he had 1. Taken a different route for no apparent reason. 2. Found the perfect land for his buried dream. 3. Met a broker willing to help. 4. Discovered an owner desperate to sell. 5. Invented a creative proposal he had never considered before. 6. Found classic cars he knew exactly how to sell. The sequence of coincidences was so improbable that even his skeptical mind was struggling to find rational explanations. That night, Marcus sat with his experiment notebook and tried to document the day's events. But the more he wrote, the more disturbed he became. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a series of perfectly orchestrated synchronicities that had created an opportunity that would change his life. This can't be real, he muttered, looking at his notes. There has to be a logical explanation. But deep down, Marcus knew something fundamental had changed. For the first time in his life, he had followed inexplicable impulses and had been rewarded in a way that defied any rational explanation. He picked up the phone and called Daniel. Daniel, it's me, Marcus. I need to tell you something. After relating the day's events, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus, Daniel finally said, you just experienced your first real synchronicity. The question now is, are you going to fight against this, or are you going to learn to work with it? Marcus looked out the window of his simple apartment, then looked at the notes in his notebook. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to feel something he had suppressed for so long he had almost forgotten how it felt: hope. Daniel, he said, his voice trembling slightly, I think I want to learn. But was Marcus really ready to abandon decades of skepticism and embrace a world where meaningful coincidences were possible? And more importantly, would he be able to sell Anthony's cars and take the first step toward his own business? Marcus's journey was just beginning, and the universe had many more surprises in store for him. Marcus spent the entire night awake, not from anxiety or worry as usual, but from a strange energy pulsing through his body. It was as if something had awakened inside him, a part of his consciousness that had remained dormant for decades. At 5 a.m, he gave up trying to sleep and sat at the kitchen table with his experiment notebook. He began reviewing all the notes from the last 10 days, looking for patterns he had previously ignored or rationalized. If this is real, he muttered to himself. There has to be a system. There have to be rules. Marcus had always been a systematic person. Even in his resistance to the mystical, he applied scientific method. If synchronicity was a real phenomenon, then it should be possible to study it, understand it, and even replicate it consistently. He divided a page into 3 columns: impulse, intuition, action taken, and result. He began mapping each event from the last few days, looking for correlations. The pattern that emerged surprised him. Every time he had followed an impulse that went against his usual logic, the result had been positive. Every time he had ignored these impulses and followed his rational approach, the results had been mediocre or negative. Interesting, he said out loud, feeling like a scientist making a discovery. It's as if my intuition has access to information my conscious mind doesn't have. 7 in the morning. Marcus did something he had never done. He called work and said he would be late because he had urgent personal matters to resolve. Normally, he would consider this irresponsible and unprofessional. But something told him that selling Anthony's cars was more important than selling cars for someone else that day. His first stop was at a cafe he had never frequented before. There was no logical reason to choose that place. It was farther and more expensive than his usual snack bar. But something attracted him there. While having his coffee and planning how to approach the sale of the classic cars, Marcus had a strange impulse. He took out his phone and started browsing social media, something he rarely did, considering it a waste of time. But that day, something made him search for vintage car groups on Facebook. In less than 5 minutes, he found a local collectors group where someone had posted exactly the night before, looking for 1978 Beetle in good condition. Pay cash for the right car. Single quotes. Marcus's heart raced. The post was only 12 hours old and already had several responses, but something made him comment immediately. I have exactly what you're looking for. 1978 Beetle impeccable, single owner, garage kept. In less than an hour, Carlos Mendez was calling Marcus. 3 hours later, Marcus was in Anthony's garage with Carlos, a vintage car collector who had brought 2 equally interested friends. What followed was the most surreal sales experience of Marcus's life. Instead of using his usual pressure and persuasion techniques, Marcus heard himself telling the story behind the cars. He talked about Anthony, about Martha, about how those cars represented dreams and memories. He talked about the need to find people who would truly value these relics. I'm not here to push cars on you, said Marcus, surprising himself. I'm here to find the right owners for these special cars. The approach worked in a way that defied all his previous experience. Carlos not only bought the Beetle for the asking price, but also referred Marcus to 2 other collectors who were looking for exactly the models Anthony had. By the end of the day, Marcus had sold all 3 cars for a total of $47,200, more than he had initially estimated. That night, he sat with his notebook and tried to analyze what had happened. The sequence of events was statistically impossible. The impulse to go to a different cafe, the inexplicable decision to check social media, finding exactly the right person at the right time. This can't be coincidence, he said out loud. There has to be something more. Marcus took out his old laptop and began researching synchronicity more seriously. That's how he truly discovered Carl Jung, not just the superficial definitions he had read before. Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidences, events that are connected not by cause and effect, but by meaning. According to Jung, these synchronicities were more likely to occur when a person was in a state of psychological openness, when they were going through important transformations, or when they were aligned with their deeper purpose. Aligned with purpose, Marcus repeated, thinking about the strange feeling he had felt when selling Anthony's cars. For the first time in decades, he had felt like he was doing something that really mattered, something that went beyond simply making money. But it was when he discovered Deepak Chopra that the pieces began to fit together in a way that made sense to his analytical mind. Chopra talked about intention as a force that organized coincidences. According to him, when a person had a clear intention and remained open to possibilities, The universe conspired to create the necessary circumstances for that intention to manifest. Intention, Marcus murmured. Not desire, not hope. Intention. He realized his intention had fundamentally changed in recent days. Before, his intention was simply to survive, pay bills, keep job, avoid problems. But now, his intention had expanded to something bigger. Create his own dealership, help people like Anthony, build something meaningful. Marcus took a blank sheet and began writing what he called Synchronicity Protocol. It was his attempt to systematize what he had learned. Synchronicity Protocol version 1.01. Define clear intention, not just I want money, but I want to create genuine value for other people. Intention should be specific but flexible about methods too. Cultivate openness. Pay attention to inexplicable impulses. Question the need to control all aspects. Be willing to act against logic when intuition indicates 3. Document patterns. Record all impulses and their results. Look for correlations between mental state and quality of synchronicities. Identify when mental resistance blocks opportunities. 4. Act with confidence. When an impulse aligns with intention, act quickly, don't over-question. Analysis paralyzes intuition. Trust that the process has its own intelligence. 5. Maintain gratitude. Recognize and thank for each synchronicity. Gratitude seems to amplify the frequency of positive events. Marcus looked at what he had written and felt a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Part of him still whispered that he was going crazy, that he was creating patterns where they didn't exist. But the results were undeniable. The next day, he decided to test his protocol more systematically. With the money from selling the cars, Marcus now had the $30,000 for Anthony's land down payment. But he still needed to solve a crucial question: how to finance the dealership construction and obtain working capital. During lunch, instead of staying at the dealership as he always did, Marcus followed an impulse to walk to the bank where he had his account. There was no specific reason. His accounts were up to date and he didn't need any banking services. But something was pulling him in that direction. In the bank line, Marcus noticed a poster about microcredit for small entrepreneurs that he had never seen before. When his turn came, instead of simply making the deposit he had planned, he asked about the program. "What a coincidence," said the manager, Fernanda. "We just received a new credit line specifically for small dealerships. It's a federal government pilot program, and we're looking for qualified candidates." Marcus discovered the program offered exactly what he needed: construction financing, initial working capital, and special conditions for those who bought their own land. Even more impressive, he qualified perfectly for the program, and there were only 3 available spots in the region. Marcus, said Fernanda after analyzing his profile, "you have exactly the profile we're looking for. Proven experience, own land, viable business plan. Can I schedule a meeting with our credit team for tomorrow?" That night, Marcus updated his protocol with a new discovery. Synchronicities seemed to work better when he was genuinely focused on serving others, not just on his own benefit. When his intention included helping people like Anthony and Martha, the universe seemed to respond more generously. He also noticed something interesting. The more he trusted the process, the more fluid the synchronicities became. It was as if his mental resistance was the main obstacle for these coincidences to happen. But Marcus still didn't know he was just scratching the surface of something much deeper and more powerful. His next discoveries would lead him to question not only his beliefs about coincidences, but his fundamental understanding about the nature of reality. Was Marcus really discovering universal laws about manifestation and synchronicity? Or was he simply having a streak of luck that would soon come to an end? 6 weeks after discovering Anthony's land, Marcus was sitting at his improvised desk, an old door supported by 2 sawhorses, in what would be the office of his future dealership. The place was still under construction, but he had insisted on working from there, even with the noise of the workers and the smell of fresh paint. His life had changed so radically that sometimes he pinched himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The bank loan had been approved in record time. Construction was ahead of schedule. He had already closed partnerships with 3 different suppliers. And most impressive, money was entering his life in ways he had never imagined. The previous week, a customer from the old dealership had specifically sought him out to buy a car. Then, a friend of that customer had also bought. Then, a neighbor of the friend. It was as if an invisible network was forming around him, bringing opportunities almost magically. But it was exactly this magic that was making Marcus deeply uncomfortable. He looked at his synchronicity notebook, now in its 3rd version, filled with notes, charts, and analyses. The patterns were undeniable. Every time he followed his protocol, defining clear intentions, staying open to impulses, acting with confidence, coincidences multiplied. Money flowed. Opportunities appeared. But one question tormented him. Was he really creating these synchronicities, or was he simply having an extraordinary streak of luck? "This can't last forever," he muttered to himself, a phrase that had become an obsessive mantra in recent weeks. Luck runs out eventually. Marcus had grown up in an environment where believing you could influence destiny was considered arrogance. "Who do you think you are to think the universe will work for you?" He heard his father's voice echoing in his mind. "People like us don't have that kind of luck." These familiar voices were becoming louder and louder as his success grew. It was as if part of him was actively sabotaging his own prosperity. That Tuesday morning, Marcus had his first real experience with what he would later discover was internal resistance. He had woken up with a strong intuition that he should call a specific supplier. There was no logical reason, just a feeling that something important was waiting for him. But instead of following the impulse immediately, as he had learned to do, Marcus hesitated. What if it's just anxiety, he thought. What if I'm imagining things? He spent 2 hours rationalizing, analyzing, looking for logical reasons to make or not make the call. When he finally called, he discovered he had missed a unique opportunity. The supplier had just closed an exclusive deal with another dealer, a deal that would have been perfect for Marcus if he had called in the morning. "Shit," he said out loud, hitting his fist on the improvised table. I knew I should have called earlier." But then a cynical voice in his head whispered, "Or maybe you're just looking for patterns where they don't exist. Maybe this intuition is just disguised anxiety." Marcus spent the rest of the day in a state of mental confusion he hadn't experienced in weeks. It was as if 2 versions of him were fighting. The new Marcus, who had learned to trust synchronicities, and the old Marcus, skeptical and controlling. That night, he called Daniel. "Daniel, I need to talk to someone. I'm starting to doubt all of this. What happened?" Marcus told about the episode with the supplier, about his growing doubts, about the fear that everything was just an elaborate illusion. "Marcus," said Daniel after hearing everything, "you're going through what I call an authorship crisis. It's normal. It happens to everyone who starts working consciously with synchronicities." Authorship crisis? It's when you start questioning whether you're really creating these coincidences or if you're just having luck. It's when the ego panics because it can't control or explain the process. Daniel explained he had gone through the same thing 6 months after starting to work with synchronicities. The rational mind hates not having control. It prefers to fail predictably than to succeed mysteriously. But how do I know if I'm not just deceiving myself? How do I know if this is real? Marcus, let me ask you a question. Are the results real? They are. Is the money entering your life real? It is. Opportunities appearing real? They are. Then what's the problem? Why do you need to completely understand how it works to be able to benefit from it? Marcus was silent. Daniel had touched on something fundamental, his obsessive need to control and understand everything before trusting. Look, Daniel continued, you don't need to understand how electricity works to turn on a light. You don't need to comprehend all the physics behind the internet to use a computer. Why would synchronicity be different? After hanging up, Marcus kept thinking about the conversation. Daniel was right about the results being real. But there was something deeper bothering him, something he was reluctant to admit even to himself. Marcus was afraid of deserving the success he was experiencing. He had spent 45 years believing he was an ordinary person, destined for an ordinary life, with ordinary problems. The idea that he could be special, that he could have access to some kind of power to create coincidences, challenged his fundamental identity. Who am I to have this kind of luck? He thought, echoing decades of family conditioning. People like me don't have the right to this kind of life. The next morning, Marcus decided to do an experiment. He would consciously test his ability to create synchronicities. If it worked, he would know something real was happening. If it didn't work, he could return to his normal life with a clear conscience. He defined a specific intention. I will find the perfect salesperson for my dealership today. Someone who shares my vision and has the complementary skills I need. Marcus had been looking for a salesperson for 2 weeks, without success. The candidates who appeared were either too inexperienced or had the old-school mentality he was trying to leave behind. Instead of placing more ads or calling employment agencies, Marcus decided to follow his synchronicity protocol. He stayed open, paid attention to impulses, and trusted that the right person would appear. At 2 in the afternoon, he had a strange impulse to go to the neighborhood bakery to buy coffee. There was no logical reason. He had coffee in his improvised office. But something was pulling him in that direction. At the bakery, Marcus found a scene that made him question again whether he was going crazy or if the universe really had a sense of humor. Sitting at a corner table was a woman of about 35, clearly frustrated, talking on the phone. "No, Mom, I'm not going back to that dealership. The environment is toxic, the boss is an idiot, and I can't stand selling cars to people who don't need them just to meet quotas." Marcus stood there, holding his coffee, listening to the conversation. The woman continued, "I want to work somewhere I can really help people, where sales is about finding the right car for each customer, not about pushing the most expensive car." It was exactly the mentality Marcus was looking for. But how to approach the situation without seeming like a stalker? Then he remembered the lessons he had learned. Trust the process, act with authenticity, focus on serving. When the woman hung up, Marcus approached. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear that you work with car sales. I'm Marcus Rodriguez. I'm opening a new dealership here in the neighborhood." The woman, who introduced herself as Carla Santos, looked at him with initial skepticism. "Oh, another salesman trying to recruit me." "Actually," said Marcus, surprising himself with his honesty, "I heard you talking about wanting to work somewhere you could really help people." That's exactly what I'm trying to create. What followed was a 2-hour conversation about business vision, sales ethics, and the possibility of creating a dealership that worked differently. Carla had 10 years of experience, a solid base of loyal customers, and most importantly, completely shared the philosophy Marcus was developing. She started working with him the following week. That night, Marcus looked at his synchronicity notebook with a mixture of admiration and terror. The experiment had worked perfectly. He had defined a specific intention, and the universe had delivered exactly what he needed, in a way that defied any rational explanation. But instead of being happy, Marcus felt even more confused. If he really had this power, what did that mean about the nature of reality? And more importantly, what did that mean about who he really was? For the first time since he had started this journey, Marcus wondered if maybe there were some mysteries that were better left unexplained. Maybe some doors were better not opened. Could Marcus go back now that he had proven to himself that synchronicities were real? Or would his need for control and understanding lead him to sabotage the very success he was building? 3 months after hiring Carla, Rodriguez Motors dealership was officially open and running better than Marcus had ever dreamed. Sales were exceeding all projections, customers were satisfied, and he had achieved something he considered impossible. He was genuinely happy with his work. But it was exactly this happiness that was becoming his biggest problem. Marcus woke up that Monday morning with a strange feeling in his stomach, not the positive excitement he had grown accustomed to feeling, but a dark anxiety he couldn't explain. It was as if something inside him was whispering, "This is too good to be true. Something will go wrong." During breakfast, he found himself obsessively checking bank accounts, looking for signs of problems that didn't exist. He called the accountant 3 times to confirm all taxes were up to date. He reviewed supplier contracts looking for clauses that could harm him. "What's happening to me?" he muttered, realizing he was acting completely irrationally. When he arrived at the dealership, Carla immediately noticed his different energy. "Marcus, are you okay? You seem worried." "I'm fine," he lied, forcing a smile. "Just checking that everything is in order." But Carla knew him well enough to notice something was wrong. In recent months, she had seen Marcus transform from a tense and controlling man into someone confident and intuitive. Seeing him regress to old patterns of anxiety was concerning. The first real sign of self-sabotage came during a negotiation with an important customer, Mr. Oliveira was interested in buying 3 cars for his executive transport company. It would be the dealership's largest individual sale to date. Marcus had followed his synchronicity protocol perfectly. He had defined the intention to find the ideal solution for the customer, had stayed open during the conversation, and had clearly felt he should offer a specific package with special conditions. But at the crucial moment of negotiation, something strange happened. Instead of following his intuition, Marcus heard a familiar voice in his head. "You're being too generous. You'll lose money. This guy is deceiving you," was his father's voice, who always said, "Everyone is trying to screw you over. Don't trust anyone." Marcus ignored his intuition and began hardening the conditions, increasing prices, removing benefits he had planned to include. He saw Mr. Oliveira's expression change from interest to distrust. "You know, Marcus," the customer finally said, "I thought you guys were different from other dealerships. But it seems in the end it's all the same." Oliveira left without buying anything. Marcus stood in the middle of the showroom, watching the potential customer leave, feeling a mixture of anger and confusion. He knew exactly what had happened. He had consciously sabotaged a sale that was practically closed. Why did I do that? He asked himself. Why didn't I trust my intuition? Carla approached. Marcus, what happened there? You were doing so well, and suddenly you completely changed energy. Marcus didn't know what to answer. How to explain that part of him was actively working against his own success. That night, he called Daniel, more confused than ever. Daniel, I think I'm going crazy. I'm sabotaging my own business. Tell me what happened. After hearing the story, Daniel sighed. Marcus, you're going through the most difficult phase of working with synchronicities, confronting your limiting beliefs about deserving. What do you mean? Think about it. You spent 45 years believing you were an ordinary person, destined for an ordinary life. Now suddenly, you're having extraordinary success, creating coincidences, living a life you always considered impossible for someone like you. Daniel explained that when a person starts manifesting real abundance, all the limiting beliefs they carry about money, success, and deserving come to the surface as defense mechanisms. It's as if part of you is saying, this can't be real. People like me don't deserve this kind of life. I'd better sabotage this before something worse happens. Marcus felt a shiver of recognition. That was exactly what was happening. But how do I stop this? First, you need to recognize that these voices aren't yours. They're programming you inherited from your family, society, past experiences. Second, you need to consciously choose new beliefs. Daniel recommended that Marcus do an exercise. Write all the limiting beliefs he could identify about money, success, and deserving, and then consciously create new beliefs to replace them. That night, Marcus sat with a blank notebook and began writing. What came out surprised him. Identified limiting beliefs. People like me don't deserve to be rich. If it's too easy, something's wrong. Everyone is trying to deceive me. Success is temporary. Failure is permanent. I'm not special enough to have luck if I get rich. I'll become a bad person. My family will judge me if I'm more successful than them. Marcus looked at the list and felt a knot in his throat. They were all voices he had heard during childhood. Messages he had internalized so deeply he didn't even realize they were driving his actions. Then he began writing new beliefs, new chosen beliefs. I deserve abundance because I use my prosperity to help others. The universe is abundant, and there's room for everyone to prosper. I can trust my intuition to guide me. Money is a tool to create value in the world. I am unique and have special gifts to offer. My success inspires others to seek their own abundance. But writing new beliefs was just the first step. Marcus discovered that reprogramming decades of mental conditioning was much harder than he had imagined. In the following days, he found himself constantly fighting against self-sabotage impulses. When a customer seemed very interested, a voice whispered, "He'll give up at the last minute." When sales were going well, another voice said, "This won't last." The worst moment came when Marcus received a proposal to expand the dealership. An investor had been impressed with his results and wanted to form a partnership to open 2 more branches. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Marcus had dreamed of. But instead of being excited, he panicked. "It's too risky," he told Carla. "What if it goes wrong? What if I lose everything?" Carla looked at him with concern. "Marcus, you're talking like the man I met 3 months ago, not like the person you've become. What's happening?" Marcus realized he was in the middle of an internal war. On one side, the new version of him that had learned to trust synchronicities and create abundance. On the other, the old version that was desperate to maintain control and avoid risks. That night, he had a disturbing dream. He was back in the small apartment where he lived before, working at a dealership as an ordinary salesman, living paycheck to paycheck. In the dream, he felt relieved. "At least here I know what to expect," he thought. Marcus woke up in a cold sweat, realizing that part of him really preferred the predictability of failure to the uncertainty of success. That's when he understood something fundamental. His limiting beliefs weren't just thoughts. They were protection systems his mind had created to avoid disappointments. They preferred to keep him small and safe than allow him to grow and risk getting hurt. But Marcus also realized he had a choice. He could continue being hostage to these old programming, or he could consciously choose to trust the process that had worked so well until then. The next morning, he called the investor and scheduled a meeting. "Carla," he said, "we're going to expand. Not because it's safe, but because it's the natural next step in our journey." But would Marcus really be able to overcome decades of limiting conditioning? Or would his beliefs about deserving continue sabotaging the extraordinary success he was building? The real battle was just beginning, and the battlefield was Marcus's own mind. 6 months after the meeting with the investor, Marcus was sitting in his new office, a modern and bright space that occupied the 2nd floor of the main dealership, looking through the window at the 2 branches that were now part of the Rodriguez Motors Group. It was a view that still surprised him every morning. But the most profound transformation wasn't in the buildings or the impressive sales numbers. It was happening inside him. The internal war that had almost destroyed everything had become the catalyst for his most significant evolution. Marcus had discovered that facing his limiting beliefs wasn't a one-time event, but a continuous process of conscious choice. That morning, he was reviewing his synchronicity protocol, now in its 10th version. The document had evolved from some simple notes to a complete system he was beginning to teach to other entrepreneurs. Synchronicity Protocol version 10.0 Fundamentals. 1. Alignment. Synchronicities flow when you're serving something greater than yourself. 2. State of receptivity. Stay open without attachment to specific results. 3. Inspired action. Distinguish between fear-based impulses and intuition-based impulses. 4. Active gratitude. Recognizing and celebrating each synchronicity strengthens the pattern. 5. Flexible persistence. Maintain intention while remaining adaptable to methods. Advanced techniques. Intention meditation. 10 daily minutes focusing on intention without forcing results. Pattern journaling. Document not just events, but emotional states that precede them. Impulse testing. Distinguish between disguised anxiety and true intuition. Belief reprogramming. Active work with limiting beliefs about deserving. Marcus smiled reading his own notes. 6 months ago, he would have mocked anyone who talked about intention meditation or belief reprogramming. Now, these practices were an integral part of his daily routine. The transformation had begun when he finally understood that his limiting beliefs weren't facts about reality. They were just stories he had chosen to believe. And if he had chosen to believe them, he could also choose to believe something different. The decisive moment had happened 3 months ago, during a crisis that almost destroyed everything he had built. One of the main suppliers had broken the contract without warning, leaving Marcus without inventory to honor sales already closed. Simultaneously, a competitor had spread rumors about Rodriguez Motors' financial problems, making some customers cancel orders. The old Marcus would have panicked, blamed the universe, and probably sabotaged the situation even more with fear-based decisions. But the new Marcus did something different. Instead of reacting immediately, he locked himself in his office for 2 hours and applied his synchronicity protocol more intensely than ever. He defined his intention clearly: find a solution that benefits everyone involved and strengthens my business long term. Then he stayed in a state of total receptivity, paying attention to any impulse or insight that arose. The first impulse was unexpected. Call the competitor who had spread the rumors. This is crazy, thought Marcus. Why would I call someone who's trying to harm me? But he had learned to trust impulses that didn't make logical sense. He called. The conversation that followed changed everything. The competitor, Robert Mendez, was going through serious financial difficulties and had spread the rumors out of desperation, trying to divert customers to his dealership. But when Marcus called, instead of confronting him, he asked a surprising question. Robert, how can I help you? Robert was so surprised he started crying on the phone. He told about family problems, accumulated debts, the fear of losing everything. Marcus listened with genuine compassion, remembering how he had felt just a year before. Robert, said Marcus, what if instead of competing, we collaborated? What emerged from this conversation was an unexpected partnership. Robert had an excellent workshop and experienced mechanics, exactly what Marcus needed to expand his services. Marcus had capital and a solid customer base, exactly what Robert needed to stabilize. They formed a partnership that solved not only the immediate crisis, but created a synergy that multiplied both their results. How did you know I would call? Asked Robert weeks later, when the partnership was already working perfectly. Marcus smiled. I didn't know. I just trusted that the right solution would appear if I stayed open. This experience had taught Marcus something fundamental about synchronicities. They weren't just about attracting good things to your life. They were about finding creative solutions that benefited everyone involved, about discovering hidden connections between apparent problems and opportunities. Now, sitting in his office, Marcus reflected on how his understanding had evolved. He had started this journey looking for a technique to make more money. He had discovered something much deeper, a way of living that was aligned with life's natural flow. His phone rang. It was Daniel. Marcus, how are you? Better than ever, Daniel. And you? Great. Listen, I'm calling because I received an interesting proposal. There's a group of business people who want to learn about synchronicities applied to business. They want someone to give a lecture on the subject. I thought of you. Marcus felt a familiar shiver, not of fear, but of recognition. It was another impulse, another synchronicity presenting itself. I've never given a lecture in my life, Daniel. I know. But you have something most speakers don't have: real results and a genuine transformation story. Besides, you've developed a system that works. Marcus looked at his protocol on the computer screen, then at the view of the 3 dealerships through the window. A year ago, he was an unemployed and skeptical salesman. Now he had created a prosperous business, developed a replicable system for working with synchronicities, and was being invited to teach others. "You know, Daniel," he said, 6 months ago I would have refused out of fear. 3 months ago I would have refused thinking I didn't deserve it. Today I accept because I feel it's the natural next step. Excellent. The lecture is in 2 weeks. The theme is how to create coincidences that generate financial abundance. After hanging up, Marcus leaned back in his chair and smiled. Another perfect synchronicity. He had been thinking about how to share what he had learned, and the universe had delivered the exact opportunity at the right moment. But this time, he didn't question whether he deserved the opportunity or if he was qualified for it. He had learned that when a synchronicity aligned with his purpose of serving others, the only appropriate response was gratitude and action. Marcus opened a new document on the computer and began writing the outline for his first lecture. As he typed, he thought about all the people who, like him a year ago, were trapped in cycles of scarcity and skepticism, not knowing there was a different way to live. If I could do it, he thought, anyone can. 2 weeks later, Marcus was on stage in an auditorium with 200 business people, telling his transformation story. When he finished, the audience stood in an ovation that lasted 3 minutes. But the most significant moment came afterward, when a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I was about to give up on my business. Your story gave me hope that maybe there's a different way to do things." Marcus felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost knocked him down. He had completed the circle, from desperate skeptic to inspiring mentor. And it had all started with a simple decision to question his beliefs and open himself to possibilities he couldn't explain rationally. That night, Marcus updated his protocol one last time, adding the most important discovery of all. The true power of synchronicities isn't in getting what you want, but in becoming who you really are. When you align with your highest purpose, the universe conspires to support not just your success, but your evolution as a human being. Marcus had discovered that creating coincidences wasn't about manipulating reality for personal benefit. It was about aligning with life's natural flow and allowing his most authentic and generous version to emerge. And this discovery had transformed not just his bank account, but his soul. Wow, what a fantastic story, don't you think? The lesson remains for all of us that the universe really conspires in favor of those who know how to work with their synchronicities. But now I want to speak directly to you who are listening to me. Stop for a moment and reflect. How many times have you had intuitions that you ignored? How many coincidences have you dismissed as mere chance? How many opportunities went unnoticed because you were too focused on controlling every aspect of your life? Marcus's story isn't just an inspiring narrative. It's a mirror that reflects the possibilities that exist within you at this exact moment. Just like Marcus, you have access to this universal intelligence that organizes synchronicities. The difference lies only in your willingness to open yourself to it. And the most beautiful thing about all this is that the protocol Marcus developed isn't a secret kept under lock and key. It's something any person can apply, starting today. You don't need special gifts. You don't need to be born with a silver spoon. You don't need extraordinary luck. You just need to be willing to question your limiting beliefs about what's possible for your life. So I ask you, are you ready to start paying attention to the signs the universe is already sending you? Are you willing to follow that intuition you always ignore? Are you prepared to discover that you can have much more power over your financial reality than you ever imagined? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue learning about how to create your own financial abundance through synchronicities. Also leave a comment telling which part of Marcus's story touched you most, or if you've already lived any similar experience of coincidences that changed your life. I'll leave a video suggestion here on the screen for you to continue your evolution and discover even more secrets about how the universe works in favor of those who know how to align with its laws. Always remember, You deserve all the abundance in the world because you were born to be happy. The universe is conspiring in your favor at this exact moment. You just need to learn to recognize the signs and have the courage to follow them. I'll see you in the next video.